The huge crystal room of the Galactic Council was filled with strange sounds from hundreds of different alien voices. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy sat in floating chairs that moved through the air like magic. Their weird shapes made dark shadows on the glowing walls. In the middle of all these giant creatures stood Ambassador Lee Day, Ho, the only human in the room, and he felt very, very small. Lee looked around at the aliens surrounding him. Some had 4 arms and red glowing eyes. Others looked like giant snakes with shiny scales. A few were made of what looked like living rock, with faces carved from stone. The peaceful ones, called ethereals, floated like ghosts and spoke in voices that sounded like singing wind. All of them were much bigger than any human, and all of them were staring at Lee with expressions that ranged from boredom to barely hidden disgust. Commander Vex of the Draknari Empire suddenly slammed all 4 of his massive arms down on his speaking platform. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. His red eyes started glowing brighter as he pointed one clawed finger directly at the human ambassador. When he spoke, his voice was so loud and angry that the crystal walls seemed to shake. "The Council wastes precious time with these pathetic humans," he roared, and his voice bounced off every surface in the giant room. "They hide behind their tiny ships like scared children and run away from every real fight. Cowards, every single one of them, weaklings who contribute nothing but pretty words and useless theories." The other aliens immediately started making sounds of agreement. The snake-like Sarathi began hissing in their strange language, which everyone knew meant they were pleased with what Commander Vex had said. The rock-skinned Gorvani started pounding their stone fists together, making a sound like boulders crashing into each other. Even the usually peaceful ethereals, who almost never spoke badly about anyone, stayed completely silent, which was their way of showing they agreed. Lee felt his hands start to shake, but he kept them at his sides where nobody could see. He had been Earth's voice in the Council for 3 long years, always trying his best to show that humans deserved respect and a place among the great civilizations of the galaxy. But no matter what he said or how hard he tried, the other races always saw humans as the weakest and most useless species in known space. Earth had joined the galactic community only 50 years ago when alien ships first visited their world. At first, the humans were excited to learn they were not alone in the universe. They dreamed of sharing knowledge and exploring the stars together with their new alien friends. But those dreams quickly turned into disappointment when they realized the galaxy operated on very simple rules. If you were strong, you were respected. If you were weak, you were ignored, or worse. Humanity had tried so hard to prove their worth. Their scientists worked day and night to solve diseases that had plagued alien worlds for thousands of years. Human doctors had saved millions of lives across dozens of different species. Their artists created beautiful music and paintings that brought joy to cultures that had forgotten how to appreciate beauty. Their engineers designed new types of ships that could travel faster and safer than anything the galaxy had seen before. But none of it mattered to the Council. They only cared about military power and the ability to destroy enemies in battle. Every other contribution was dismissed as clever tricks or lucky accidents, honored Council members. Lee began trying to keep his voice steady, even though he felt anger burning in his chest like fire. Humanity has contributed much knowledge to our shared community. Our scientists have cured the Red Death that killed billions on Gorvani Prime. Our musicians have brought the gift of harmony to species who had never heard music before. Our teachers have helped educate the young of 12 different worlds. Commander Vex laughed, and it was a harsh, cruel sound that made several other aliens start chuckling and roaring with amusement. Pretty words and clever tricks, he said with obvious disgust in his voice. But when the Void Pirates attacked the mining station at Kepler 442, where were these brave humans? Where was their courage when innocent beings were dying and calling for help? The commander paused and looked around the chamber, making sure every alien was listening to his next words. The humans were hiding safely behind the Draknari war fleet. As always, he continued watching from a safe distance, while real warriors fought and bled and died to protect the weak and helpless. Lee felt his cheeks get hot with shame, because what Commander Vex said was partly true and everyone in the chamber knew it. Earth's military was incredibly small compared to the massive war fleets that other species could field. In battle, humanity had always preferred to use their minds instead of weapons to solve problems. They believed that intelligent conversation could resolve any conflict if both sides were willing to try, but the galaxy did not work that way. Out here among the stars, strength meant military power, and military power meant the ability to destroy your enemies completely. Everything else was seen as weakness or cowardice. The Kepler incident was a rescue and medical mission. Lee said, trying desperately to defend his species. Actions. We sent our best doctors and engineers to help treat the wounded and repair the damaged station systems. Our people saved hundreds of lives that day. Technical support, repeated Counselor Zath of the Gorvani, and her voice sounded like two mountains grinding against each other. That is just a fancy way of saying you were too frightened to actually fight. Your people hid in the back and played with computers while others faced death. The entire chamber suddenly erupted in alien laughter. Some species made clicking and chittering sounds. Others let out deep roars that shook the air. A few simply started glowing much brighter, which was their way of showing amusement. But all of them were laughing at humanity and at Lee, who stood there, representing his entire species. Lee clenched his hands into tight fists and thought about his young daughter back on Earth. She was only 8 years old, and she believed her father was out among the stars making friends and helping to build a better future for all humans. Every night before bed, she would ask when Daddy was coming home and whether the aliens liked humans yet. He also thought about the billions of people on Earth who trusted him to represent them with dignity and honor. They had chosen him as their ambassador because they believed he could show the galaxy that humanity deserved respect. Most of them had never even seen an alien, but they dreamed of the day when humans would be accepted as equals in the galactic community all. Those dreams and hopes were being crushed by the cruel laughter echoing through the crystal chamber. Perhaps, Lee said, and his voice began to grow stronger and more confident, perhaps the honored council would like to see what one human can actually accomplish when they are properly motivated and given a real chance to prove themselves. The laughter stopped immediately. The sudden silence was so complete that Lee could hear the soft humming of the chamber's power systems. Commander Vex leaned forward on his platform, and his 4 red eyes narrowed to burning slits as he stared down at the human ambassador. "What did you just say, little human?" he asked, and his voice was now quiet and dangerous instead of loud and mocking. Lee straightened his shoulders and stood as tall as he could. He was making a decision that would either save humanity's reputation forever or destroy any hope his species had of being accepted by the galactic community. There was no going back from what he was about to say. "I propose a test," Lee announced, and his words rang clearly through the silent chamber. "Choose your most dangerous mission, something that requires true courage and skill and intelligence. Send one human to complete it alone with no help from anyone." The chamber remained dead silent. Even the floating lights seemed to dim as hundreds of alien minds tried to process what they had just heard. Finally, Counselor Zath spoke, and her voice rumbled like a distant earthquake. "One human," she asked slowly, "against a challenge that would test our greatest warriors." "One human," Lee confirmed, even though his heart was pounding so hard he was sure everyone in the chamber could hear it. "If we succeed, then humanity earns the respect we deserve. If we fail, then you never have to listen to us again." Commander Vex's mouth stretched into what might have been a smile, showing multiple rows of sharp teeth that could easily tear through metal. "Very interesting," he said, and his voice carried a note of cruel anticipation. "Very, very interesting indeed, little human." 3 days had passed since Ambassador Lee Dae-ho made his bold challenge to the Galactic Council, and now the massive crystal chamber was filled with excitement instead of boredom. Word had spread across the entire galaxy that the humans had claimed they could do the impossible. Betting pools had been created on hundreds of different worlds, and most aliens were placing their money on how quickly the human would die. The atmosphere in the chamber felt electric, as representatives from every species gathered to watch what many believed would be humanity's final humiliation. News reporters from dozens of galactic networks had set up their equipment to broadcast the event live to billions of viewers. Entertainment companies were already planning documentaries about the day the weakest species in the galaxy finally learned their place. Commander Vex stood at the center of the chamber holding a glowing red data crystal that seemed to pulse with dangerous energy. His 4 arms were spread wide as he addressed the assembled aliens, and his voice carried easily through the silent room. The anticipation was so thick you could almost touch it. "The Council has made its decision. Ambassador Lee," he announced, and his words echoed off the crystal walls. "Your test has been chosen, and I must say it is quite fitting for a species that thinks so highly of itself." Lee felt his mouth go dry, but he nodded for the commander to continue. His aide, Ambassador Yun. So Jin sat in the observation area looking pale and worried. She had tried to talk Lee out of this challenge, but he had refused to back down. Now they were all committed to whatever impossible task the aliens had devised for the past 2 years. Commander Vex continued. "The fortress station, called Omega-7, has been controlled by the most dangerous criminal organization in known space. The Crimson Brotherhood has turned this station into their headquarters, and they use it to launch attacks against innocent colonies across the galaxy." Massive holographic display appeared above the chamber, showing a dark metal structure floating in the void of space. The station looked like a nightmare made real, with weapon turrets covering every surface and defensive systems that glowed with deadly energy. Even in the recording, it seemed to radiate menace and death. "The Brotherhood consists of over 300 hardened criminals," Vex explained as the hologram rotated slowly. "All of them are experienced fighters with military-grade weapons and armor. The station's shields are nearly impossible to break through, and it is surrounded by a field of explosive mines that have destroyed many ships." Lee stared at the holographic station and felt his confidence begin to crumble. It was enormous, easily 10 times larger than Earth's biggest space facility. The weapon systems alone looked like they could destroy a small moon, and the defensive barriers seemed impenetrable. "These pirates have been using Omega-7 to attack peaceful settlements," the commander continued. "They have destroyed 17 different colonies and killed thousands of innocent beings, including women and children. The Council has sent 3 separate battle fleets to stop them, and all 3 fleets were defeated with heavy losses." The other aliens in the chamber made approving sounds as they watched the display. Many of them had lost friends or family members to Brotherhood attacks. The Crimson Brotherhood was hated throughout the galaxy, but they had proven too strong and too clever for conventional military forces. "Your mission is beautifully simple," Vex said, and his voice carried a note of cruel satisfaction. "One human will infiltrate the station, eliminate the pirate leadership, and disable their entire operation. No support ships, no backup forces, no help from any other species whatsoever." The chamber erupted in alien voices as representatives discussed this impossible task. Some were already calculating betting odds, while others were expressing amazement that any species would attempt something so suicidal. The snake-like Sarathi were hissing with what sounded like laughter, Lee looked up at Ambassador Yun in the observation area and saw the fear in her eyes. She was gripping the railing, so tightly her knuckles had turned white. But he also saw something else in her expression: trust and faith in humanity, even when the situation seemed hopeless. The Council is most generous. Lee managed to say, though his voice sounded strained. Would this mission need to take place? In exactly 1 week? Vex replied immediately. That should give you sufficient time to select your champion and make peace with whatever gods your species worships. More alien laughter filled the chamber. But this time. It sounded different to Lee. Less mocking and more eager. They weren't just expecting the human to fail anymore. They were looking forward to watching it happen. The entertainment value of seeing humanity's final defeat was apparently worth more than simple mockery. Lee thought about the message he would have to send back to Earth. How could he possibly explain that he had volunteered his entire species for what amounted to a public execution? How could he ask someone to sacrifice their life just to prove a point about human courage? But then he remembered something that Admiral Park Jin-woo had told him before he left Earth for his diplomatic mission. The galaxy doesn't understand what humans become when they are pushed beyond their limits. They see our preference for peaceful solutions as weakness and our careful planning as cowardice. But they have never seen what we are capable of when we have no choice except to fight. The Admiral had been talking about human history, and all the times that seemingly impossible victories had been won by people who refused to give up. Even when the odds were completely against them, humans had found ways to turn defeat into victory through creativity, determination, and sheer stubborn refusal to quit 1 week, Lee said, and his voice grew stronger as he spoke. Humanity accepts your challenge with honor. The aliens cheered and roared their approval as they began making plans for what they expected to be the greatest entertainment event in galactic history. Some were already booking passage to nearby systems so they could watch the news broadcasts with friends. Others were placing larger bets now that the timeline was confirmed. As the council session ended, Lee walked quickly toward the communication center. He had an extremely important message to send to Earth, and he needed to speak to some very special people who had dedicated their entire lives to accomplishing missions that everyone else said were impossible. The communication room was filled with holographic displays showing star charts and transmission routes. Lee activated the secure channel to Earth and waited for the connection to establish. When Admiral Park's face appeared on the screen, Lee took a deep breath and began explaining the situation. Admiral, we have a problem, he said. But maybe we also have an opportunity back on Earth in the secure military command center. Admiral Park listened to Lee's report with growing amazement. When the transmission ended, he sat back in his chair and thought about what he had just heard. The aliens had essentially challenged humanity to prove itself in the most dramatic way possible. The Admiral reached for his communication device and began sending messages to very specific people. People who specialized in impossible missions and who had never failed to complete an assignment, no matter how dangerous it seemed. The Navy SEALs were about to face their greatest challenge, and the entire galaxy would be watching to see what one human could accomplish when everything was on the line. In space stations and colonies across the galaxy, aliens were already making preparations for what they believed would be humanity's final moment. The betting pools were growing larger by the hour, and entertainment networks were planning special coverage of the event. None of them realized they were about to witness something that would change their understanding of what it meant to be human forever. The secure meeting room deep inside Earth's military headquarters was filled with tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. General Kim Tae-sung sat at the head of the long metal table reading the message from Ambassador Lee for the third time. His weathered face showed no emotion, but everyone in the room could see the worry in his eyes. Around the table sat the most important military officers on Earth. Admiral Park Jin-woo drummed his fingers nervously on the table surface. "Colonel, Oh, hi, Jin. The head of Special Operations stared at the holographic display showing Omega-7 station. Lieutenant Commander Song Min-ho was reviewing tactical data and shaking his head in disbelief. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Admiral," Park said slowly. "Our ambassador has volunteered one of our people for what is basically a suicide mission to defend humanity's reputation in the galaxy. That is one way to describe the situation, Colonel O," replied, her voice carefully controlled. "But another way to look at it is that we finally have a real chance to show every alien species what humans are truly capable of when we stop holding back." The holographic display in the center of the room showed the same terrifying image that had been presented to the Galactic Council Omega-7 station, rotated slowly in the darkness of space, and its weapon systems were clearly visible. Intelligence reports scrolled past, showing guard rotations, defensive capabilities, and estimated enemy. "Strength, 300 pirates," Lieutenant Commander Song muttered as he studied the tactical information. "Military-grade weapons, energy shields, and a fortress that has defeated 3 alien battle fleets. This is not a mission. This is elaborate suicide." The room fell quiet as everyone absorbed the full scope of what they were being asked to accomplish. One person against an entire army of experienced criminals in a fortress that had proven impregnable to conventional military forces. Admiral Park looked around the table at his officers. These were some of the finest military minds on Earth, and they all looked like they were attending a funeral. The silence stretched on until a quiet voice spoke from the back of the room. "Sounds like a typical Tuesday. To me." Everyone turned to stare at Chief Petty Officer Han-jun SEO, who sat calmly in his chair as if they were discussing weekend plans instead of an impossible military operation. He was not the biggest man in the room, nor the loudest, but when he spoke, everyone listened because his reputation spoke louder than words. Han had been a Navy SEAL for 12 years, and in that time he had completed over 40 successful missions in hostile territory. His record included rescuing hostages from terrorist compounds, infiltrating enemy bases that were supposed to be impregnable, and eliminating high-value targets that other forces could not reach. More importantly, Han had never failed to complete a mission, no matter how dangerous it seemed. His fellow SEALs called him the Ghost because he could appear and disappear like smoke. His enemies never saw him coming, and by the time they realized he was there, it was already too late. General Kim leaned forward and studied Han's calm expression. "You really think this mission is possible?" Han shrugged as if they were discussing the weather while his dark eyes continued studying the station's layout. "Define possible, General." "Can one person infiltrate a heavily defended space station and neutralize 300 enemies?" "Under normal circumstances, I would say absolutely not." Several officers exchanged worried glances and began preparing to tell Ambassador Lee that the mission was completely impossible. The odds were simply too overwhelming for any reasonable person to attempt, but these are not normal circumstances. Han continued, and a slight smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. "The aliens are completely convinced that humans are weak and cowardly. They expect us to fail so badly that they will not be prepared for what is actually coming their way, Colonel." O nodded slowly as she began to understand Han's thinking. Underestimation can be turned into a weapon. "The biggest weapon we have," Han agreed. "The aliens think this mission requires massive military force because that is how they solve every problem. Overwhelming firepower and direct frontal assault. But sometimes the best way to destroy a fortress is to make it destroy itself from the inside." Admiral Park looked at the tactical display again, studying the station's defensive systems. "What would you need to accomplish this mission?" Han was quiet for several long minutes, his mind already working through dozens of different possibilities and scenarios he was visualizing. The mission from beginning to end, identifying potential problems and developing solutions for each challenge. Standard SEAL equipment modified for space operations. He finally said, "A small, fast ship that can penetrate their sensor grid without being detected, and approximately 72 hours to study their behavioral patterns and security procedures." General Kim raised his eyebrows in surprise. "That is all you would need. That is everything I need," Han confirmed. The aliens believe this mission requires a massive space fleet, because that is how their minds work. But sometimes, the most effective approach is the one nobody expects. Lieutenant Commander Song pulled up the station's internal layout and pointed to several areas. The intelligence. Reports indicate they are holding hostages, civilian miners they captured during their raids on peaceful colonies. Han's expression immediately became harder and more focused. How many hostages? At least 50 people, possibly more. Song replied, "Men, women, and children from various species. They are being held in the lower cargo areas." "Then this mission is not just about proving human courage," Han said quietly. "This is about saving innocent lives and showing the galaxy that humanity fights for more than just pride." The room became completely silent as everyone realized the full weight of what they were discussing. This was not just a military operation or a diplomatic gesture. This was a chance to demonstrate that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their weapons. It was their willingness to risk everything for people they had never met simply because it was the right thing to do. General Kim stood up and looked directly at Han, Chief Petty Officer. "You have the complete resources of Earth's military at your disposal. Whatever equipment you need, wherever you need it, delivered it is yours." Without question, Han nodded and rose from his chair. "I will need a ship ready for launch in exactly 48 hours. And I want to personally select every piece of equipment that goes on that mission. Consider it done." Admiral Park said, "But Han, you understand what you are volunteering for. If this mission goes wrong, I will be too dead to worry about the consequences," Han replied with dry humor. "But if this goes right, then maybe the galaxy will finally understand something important about humanity." "What is that?" General Kim asked. "That we are not cowards," Han said as he headed toward the door. "We are, just smart enough to choose our battles carefully, and when we do choose to fight, we fight to win as." The meeting ended and officers hurried away to begin preparations. Han remained behind, staring at the holographic display of Omega-7. He was not thinking about the danger or calculating the odds of success. He was thinking about 50 innocent people trapped in that metal fortress and about the look on Ambassador Lee's face when he proved that one human could indeed change everything. The small stealth ship Whisper drifted silently through the dark asteroid field that surrounded Omega-7 station, like a protective barrier. The ship was so quiet that it seemed more like a ghost than a real vessel floating through the dangerous rocks and metal debris that filled the space around the pirate fortress. Inside the cramped cockpit, Hanjun SEO sat perfectly still, making final adjustments to his specialized equipment while his eyes never stopped watching the enemy patrol patterns. He had been observing the station for 6 straight hours, memorizing every detail of their security procedures and noting the timing of their guard rotations. The Crimson Brotherhood was exactly as overconfident as Han had hoped they would be. Their patrol ships moved in predictable patterns that never changed. Their sensor sweeps followed the same routes every single time. They had grown comfortable and lazy in their supposedly impregnable fortress, never expecting any real threat to reach them through their defenses. Han's earpiece crackled softly with a transmission from Earth Control. "This is Control calling Whisper. Please confirm final equipment. Status, copy Control," Han replied in a whisper. "Stealth suit shows full operational status. Magnetic grappling devices are secured and tested. Plasma cutting tools are charged to maximum capacity. All weapon systems show green lights across the board. Remember, Whisper, you have people watching this mission. The hostage situation changes everything. about how the galaxy sees this operation, Han understood the message that Control was really sending. The entire galaxy was watching this mission, but they were not just watching to see if one human could complete an impossible military task. Word had somehow leaked about the civilian prisoners trapped on the station, and suddenly other alien species were paying attention for completely different reasons. If Han could save those innocent hostages, it would not just prove that humans were brave. It would prove that humans cared about protecting the weak and helpless, even when it meant risking everything. Through the small view screen, Omega-7 station loomed larger and more threatening as the Whisper drifted closer on its silent approach. The station was absolutely massive, with its dark metal hull covered in weapon turrets and sensor arrays that constantly swept the surrounding space for threats. Han could see the docking bays where the pirates kept their stolen ships and the heavy mining equipment they used to strip valuable resources from captured asteroids. The entire structure radiated menace and spoke of violence and cruelty, visual contact with primary target. Han reported quietly, beginning final approach to insertion point. The insertion point Han had chosen was a maintenance shaft on the station's lower level, hidden among the cooling systems and power conduits. The pirates had welded the shaft closed years ago, thinking it would never be needed again. But Han's plasma cutter would make quick work of the metal seal. The shaft led directly into the station's service tunnel network, giving him access to the entire facility without triggering any of the main security systems. It was the kind of entrance that larger alien species would never consider, because their military thinking focused on overwhelming force rather than stealth and infiltration. As the Whisper maneuvered carefully into position, Han turned his thoughts to the intelligence files he had spent days memorizing. Captain Rex Vorthen, the leader of the Crimson Brotherhood, was a former military officer from the Draknari Empire who had been kicked out of the service for committing terrible war crimes. Vorthen had spent the last 10 years building the most feared pirate organization in the galaxy through a combination of tactical brilliance and absolute ruthlessness. He ruled his crew through fear and violence, but he also shared the profits from their raids, which kept them loyal and motivated. The station's defenses were impressive by any military standard. Energy shields protected the structure from bombardment by space fleets. Automated weapon turrets covered every possible approach route. The internal corridors were monitored by security cameras and patrolled by heavily armed guards. The command center was located deep in the station's core, surrounded by multiple layers of security barriers and defensive systems. It was designed to be absolutely impossible to reach by conventional military assault. But Han had identified the critical weakness that every alien military commander had missed. They had all focused on trying to break through the station's external defenses with massive fleets and overwhelming firepower. None of them had considered that sometimes the most effective way to defeat a fortress was not to attack it directly. Instead, the best approach was often to make the fortress attack itself from within. Control, I am going radio silent for insertion procedure, Han reported, as the Whisper settled gently against the station's hull. Next scheduled contact is in 36 hours. Copy, Whisper. The voice from Earth replied. Good hunting out there. Han sealed his helmet and activated his stealth suit's advanced camouflage system. The incredible technology bent light waves around his body, making him nearly invisible to both visual observation and most types of sensor equipment. It was one of Earth's newest military developments, created specifically for operations exactly like this one. The plasma cutter made quick and silent work of the maintenance shafts. Metal seal Han slipped inside the narrow tunnel, moving carefully through the confined space. His suit's sensors automatically mapped the station's internal structure as he moved, building a detailed three-dimensional picture of the entire facility. The service tunnels were exactly as the intelligence reports had described them. They ran throughout the station like blood vessels carrying power conduits, data cables, and atmosphere recycling systems. More importantly, they were too small for the larger alien species that made up most of the pirate crew. The original designers had never considered that someone might use these tunnels as an infiltration route because they thought in terms of conventional military assault rather than stealth operations. Han paused at a junction where 3 different tunnels met and peered through a maintenance grate into one of the station's main corridors. 2 pirate guards walked past carrying their weapons casually while talking and laughing about something completely unaware that death was watching them from above, but Han was not here to kill random guards, at least not yet. First, he needed to gather detailed intelligence about the hostage locations, identify the command structure, and find a way to turn the station's own defensive systems against the people who controlled them. Moving deeper into the facility, Han followed the main power conduits toward the station's computer core. If he could access the central system, he could gather all the information he needed and begin preparing for the real battle that was coming. Behind him, the Whisper automatically disengaged from the station and drifted back into the asteroid field. Its computer systems were programmed to wait for Han's return signal while maintaining complete radio silence. On dozens of worlds throughout the galaxy, millions of beings watched news feeds and placed bets on how long the lone human would survive inside the pirate fortress. Most of them expected him to be captured or killed within the first few hours. They were all about to discover that survival was never the goal. Victory was what mattered. And Hanjun SEO had never learned how to lose. Deep inside the computer core of Omega-7 Station, Hanjun SEO worked with focused intensity at a maintenance terminal. His fingers moved across the alien interface with practiced skill, while the translator software in his suit converted the strange symbols into readable information. What he discovered in the station's databases made his jaw clench with cold anger. The hostages were not just random minors, as the intelligence reports had suggested. They were entire families, including children. As young as 6 years old, who had been taken during the Brotherhood's brutal raids on peaceful civilian settlements, Captain Vorthen was keeping them in the station's lower cargo holds like animals, while he planned to sell them as slaves to the highest bidder. Han memorized the exact location of every single prisoner, every guard rotation schedule, and every security checkpoint between his current position and the areas where the hostages were being held. Then he began implementing the plan that would turn the station's greatest strengths into fatal weaknesses. The Crimson Brotherhood had filled Omega-7 with automated defense systems, thinking these would make their fortress completely impregnable. Han was about to demonstrate why human creativity and tactical thinking were more dangerous than any weapon system ever built. First, he reprogrammed the internal communication network. With careful keystrokes, he created ghost signals and false alarms that would begin triggering in exactly 1 hour. The security cameras would start showing movement in completely empty corridors. The motion sensors would detect phantom intruders that did not exist. The environmental systems would report dangerous atmospheric breaches in sections that were perfectly sealed. These false alarms would create chaos and confusion throughout the station as guards rushed to investigate threats that were not really there. Next, Han accessed the weapon control systems. The station's internal defense turrets were designed to stop boarding parties and hostile infiltrators, but with a few simple program modifications, they could be made to target the pirates themselves. Han planted a computer virus in their targeting systems that would activate when he transmitted the correct signal. Finally, he reached the most critical system of all, the artificial gravity generators. Omega-7 was built like a giant wheel, spinning slowly to create artificial gravity through centrifugal force. The pirates had grown, comfortable fighting in normal gravity conditions, but Han had been training in zero-gravity combat environments since he was 18 years old. As he worked, Han could hear the casual chatter of pirate guards through his earpiece. They were complaining about their duty assignments, arguing over who got the best sleeping quarters, and discussing their plans for spending their share of the next raid's profits. They sounded like soldiers anywhere in the galaxy, except for one crucial difference: they had chosen to make their living by preying on innocent civilians who could not defend themselves. That single fact made what Han was about to do much easier to justify in his mind, with all his sabotage programs carefully installed and ready to activate. Han began moving toward the areas where the hostages were being held. The service tunnels brought him close to the cargo holds, and through another maintenance grate he could see the prisoners, families huddled together in the dim emergency, lighting their faces, showing the kind of hopeless despair that came from days of captivity and fear. A small child covered in blue fur was crying quietly, while her mother tried to comfort her with gentle words. An elderly man from one of the peaceful trading species sat with his head buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. These innocent people had done absolutely nothing wrong except live in the path of the Crimson Brotherhood's endless greed for wealth and power, hand checked. His chronometer, 57 minutes, remained until his sabotage programs would activate automatically. It was time to begin the real mission that would either save these people or result in his own death. The first guard never had any warning of what was coming. Han dropped silently from the maintenance shaft directly behind the alien pirate. His plasma knife slid between the guard's ribs with surgical precision. The pirate collapsed without making a sound, his weapon clattering uselessly. To the metal floor, Han quickly dragged the body into a nearby storage closet and took the guard's communication device and security access cards. Now he could move more freely through the station's corridors and monitor the pirate's internal communications. Second guard was positioned in a more difficult location, but Han had been training for scenarios exactly like this his entire adult life. He used the station's own structure as a weapon, moving through maintenance shafts, climbing along power conduits, and striking from angles that his enemies never expected. By the time his computer programs activated, Han had eliminated 6 guards and positioned himself outside the main security center. The station suddenly erupted in complete chaos as alarms began blaring and false alerts flooded the communication channels. Security breach detected in Section 7 shouted one confused pirate over the radio negative. The breach is actually in Section 12, replied another voice filled with uncertainty. All sections are reporting normal status, called a third pirate. His confusion obvious. Han smiled grimly and activated the second phase of his carefully planned assault. The internal defense turrets came online throughout the station, but instead of protecting the pirates, they began systematically targeting them. Screams of terror and pain echoed through the corridors as the Brotherhood's own weapons turned against them. Captain Vorthan's angry voice cut through the chaos on the communication channels. All units report to emergency battle stations immediately. We are under direct attack. Sir, the external sensors show no threats approaching the station. His second-in-command replied with obvious confusion. Then the threat is already inside. Vorthan snarled. Lock down every sector and begin a complete deck-by-deck search. Find this intruder and kill him. That was exactly what Han wanted to hear. Vorthan was responding in a predictable military fashion, consolidating his forces and creating exactly the kind of target-rich environment that a single skilled operator could exploit. Most effectively, Han planted shaped explosive charges on the security center's reinforced door and took cover around the corner. The explosion shattered the entrance and sent thick smoke billowing through the corridor. As the surviving security personnel stumbled out blind and disoriented, Han was waiting for them. 3 precise shots from his plasma rifle, and the station's central security was completely eliminated. Han stepped through the acrid smoke and began systematically shutting down the internal sensor networks one by one. Now the pirates would be completely blind inside their own fortress. The final phase of his plan was the most dangerous part. Han fought his way through corridors filled with panicking and confused pirates toward the gravity control center. His stealth suit kept him nearly invisible, but in the chaos of battle, speed and precision were more important than stealth. When he finally reached the gravity generators. Han paused for a moment and smiled at the perfect irony. The aliens had built their entire station around the basic assumption that gravity would always point downward. They had never considered what would happen. If that fundamental assumption was suddenly proven wrong, Han's finger hovered over the control switch that would shut down the artificial gravity throughout Omega-7. Once he pressed it, the battle would transform into a three-dimensional nightmare, where the only advantage belonged to whoever was best trained to fight in zero-gravity conditions. The Crimson Brotherhood was about to learn that when it came to zero-gravity combat, no military force in the galaxy was better prepared than a human. Navy SEAL. The instant Han shut down the artificial gravity system, Omega-7 station transformed from a fortress into a three-dimensional battlefield where the concepts of up and down suddenly ceased to exist. Throughout the massive structure pirates found themselves floating helplessly in mid-air, while their weapons drifted away from their grasping hands. But Han moved through the zero-gravity environment like he had been born among the stars. Every surface became a launching point, every corridor transformed into a potential attack vector. He had spent thousands of hours training in Earth's zero-gravity facilities, learning to fight in conditions that most other species found completely disorienting and terrifying. The pirates' panic filled. Voices echoed through the communication channels as Han systematically dismantled their criminal organization. He moved like a deadly ghost through the darkened corridors, striking from impossible angles and vanishing before his enemies could even understand what was happening to them. "Where is this intruder?" Captain Vorthon roared over the radio system. "How can one single being cause this much destruction and chaos?" "Sir, we cannot get clear shots at the target," one of his lieutenants replied, desperately. "He is using the zero gravity to his advantage, like nothing we have ever seen. Our people do not know how to fight in these conditions." That was exactly what Han had planned and counted on. The galaxy's military forces were all designed around the assumption of standard gravity and predictable battlefield conditions. None of them had seriously considered that sometimes the most effective weapon was the environment itself. Han reached the first hostage-holding area and found the guards floating helplessly near the ceiling, trying desperately to orient themselves in the sudden weightlessness. His plasma rifle spoke twice with mechanical precision, and the guards went silent forever, leaving only the sound of frightened breathing. From behind the sealed door, through the reinforced barrier, he could see the terrified faces of the prisoners. Adults were trying to calm crying children, while elderly beings struggled to understand the sudden absence of gravity that had thrown their world into chaos. "I am here to rescue you," Han said, keeping his voice calm and reassuring, despite the sounds of battle erupting throughout the station. "Stay close together and follow my instructions exactly." A woman from the peaceful ethereal species floated toward him, her translucent form shimmering with relief and desperate hope. "Are you from the Galactic Council? Rescue Fleet?" "I am from Earth," Han replied, while already guiding the hostages toward the corridor. "Right now, I need everyone to grab the emergency guide cables and move toward the evacuation point. Stay together and do not let go." As they moved carefully through the station, Han could hear increasingly desperate communications from the surviving pirates. Captain Vorthon was trying frantically to rally his forces, but the zero gravity had completely broken their ability to coordinate any kind of effective response. All remaining units converge on the command center. Immediately, Vorthon ordered, his voice filled with rage and growing desperation. "We will make our final stand." There Han smiled coldly as he listened. Vorthon was doing exactly what military commanders always did when faced with an unconventional threat: fall back to established defensive positions and try to fight a traditional battle. It was a reasonable response that would get him and his remaining crew killed. The evacuation of the hostages took exactly 40 minutes. Han guided them through maintenance shafts and service corridors carefully, avoiding the areas where pirates were still attempting to organize some kind of resistance. The children were frightened but remarkably brave, and their parents helped keep everyone moving together when the last civilian was safely aboard a stolen. Pirate shuttle Han sealed the docking bay and sent them away from the station at maximum speed. Only then did he turn his complete attention to finishing what he had started. The command center was located deep in Omega-7's armored core, surrounded by multiple layers of security doors and defensive positions. Under normal circumstances with standard gravity, it would have been nearly impossible for any single person to assault successfully, but these were definitely not normal circumstances. Han approached from directly above, using the station's structural framework to reach a maintenance hatch positioned over Vorthan's command position. Through the metal grating, he could see the pirate captain floating near a control console desperately, trying to coordinate his remaining forces. Vorthan was exactly as the intelligence reports had described him, a massive Draknari with 4 powerful arms and natural armor plating covering his entire torso. His red eyes glowed with murderous rage as he screamed orders at his subordinates, and his razor-sharp claws left deep gouges in the metal control surfaces. Around him, the surviving pirates floated in clumsy, disorganized formations, with their weapons pointed randomly in every direction. As they tried to watch for threats from all possible angles, they were brave enough in their own way, but they had never faced an enemy who fought like Han, planted shaped explosive charges around the maintenance hatch, and took careful cover. The explosion blew the hatch inward, filling the command center with thick smoke and metal debris. As the pirates spun around in complete confusion, Han dropped through the opening like an avenging angel sent from the heavens. The final battle lasted less than 30 seconds. Han moved with deadly precision through the 3-dimensional chaos, his plasma rifle finding every target despite the weightless environment. The pirates tried desperately to return fire, but their weapons were designed for gravitational combat, and their shots went completely wide. When the smoke finally cleared, only Han and Captain Vorthan remained alive in the shattered command center. The pirate captain floated near the far wall, his 4 arms spread wide as he struggled to orient himself in the unfamiliar weightless conditions. "This is impossible." Vorthan snarled, his voice filled with hatred and complete disbelief. "One pathetic human cannot defeat the entire Crimson Brotherhood. The human already has." Han replied calmly, with his weapon trained steadily on the pirate's center mass. "Your criminal organization is finished. Your hostages are free and safe. Your reign of terror against innocent people is over. Forever." Vorthan's red eyes blazed with fury and desperate rage. "The galaxy will never show respect to your weak, pathetic species. You are all cowards and weaklings who hide behind technology." Han tightened his finger on the trigger. "Tell that to the families you terrorized and murdered. Tell that to the children you were planning to sell like animals." The plasma bolt struck Vorthan directly in the chest, ending the Crimson Brotherhood's threat to innocent civilians throughout the galaxy forever. As the pirate captain's body drifted slowly through the zero gravity, Han activated his communication device. "Control. This is Whisper reporting. Mission accomplished successfully. Omega-7 is completely secured. All hostages are safe and evacuated, and the Brotherhood has been permanently eliminated." The response came back immediately, filled with joy, relief, and amazement. Copy Whisper, outstanding work. The entire galaxy has been watching the live news feeds. You have just demonstrated to every species in known space what humanity is truly capable of achieving. Han looked around the destroyed command center, then reactivated the station's gravity generators. As weight slowly returned to Omega-7, he felt the deep satisfaction that came from a job completed successfully. But more than that, he felt proud to be human, somewhere in space. Ambassador Lee Dae-ho was probably watching the news reports with tears of pride and vindication in his eyes. The Galactic Council would never again dare to call humans cowards. They had learned what Earth's military Forces had always known. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy was the one you completely underestimated. As Han made his way back to the Whisper for the journey home to Earth, he thought about the message this mission would send throughout the galaxy. Humanity did not need massive battle fleets or overwhelming firepower to make a real difference in the universe. They had something far more valuable: the creativity to turn any situation to their advantage, the intelligence to find weaknesses where others saw only strength, and most importantly, the courage to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. The galaxy had called humans cowards and weaklings. One Navy SEAL had just proven them completely and utterly wrong.